We have 3 of the 4. You don't know if Josh is on his way, or is he? What's
he's up there.
Yes, Councilor.
He's up. He's remote. Oh, okay. Good.
Just gone through
Yeah, I was just texting him about he was coming.
So have you got a copy of the agenda for me? So for those who are new to this party, which I'm right here, and Councilor Roche, the Rules Committee has been historically a subcommittee of the Programs and Services Committee, and has operated in a format where we've had 4 members, and it was actually formalized in the last rules revision to make recommendations. And one of the things that I have to check under the rules is candidly whether we can make a recommendation tonight to the Programs and Services Committee without having the Programs and Services Committee have it on its agenda. Do they have rules on its agenda? That's what no. Because we got a couple of action items that are worth taking up. And Councilor Kritzman, and this is a failure on my part. I didn't think clearly about the dance steps after we got through tonight for a couple of items which are more time sensitive at the recommendation of the city solicitor. So the question is, can we consider those for a brief meeting before the next council meeting, or are we just to make sure that your committee can report them out and we can get them done, as opposed to having them held until the next meeting when you can take them up?
First of all, my apologies. I am on my way. I was planning to be there by 6 o'clock. There's just a lot of traffic in front of Cold Spring Park, so I apologize. I'll be there shortly. No, we don't have any rules on the agenda for tonight. I actually didn't know that there were urgent items you were looking to get to. So why don't we discuss them tonight, and then I'll work with you to get it either on the next agenda or come up with a special meeting, as soon as we can.
I'll be out of town for the next Programs and Services meeting. Not that it matters for this purpose, but
I will too.
We can do it. Maybe consider a brief meeting before the council, because I think there's some value in having a couple of these clarified sooner rather than later. But this is all, just our process of getting started. So having started the meeting without actually formally introducing it, let me do that. This is the Rules Subcommittee, and we're present at the start of the meeting in the room. Councilor Oliver, President, and Councilor Brittany Charm, and we're so delighted to have you as part of this.
Delighted to be here.
And then on remote, we have Councilor Maliki, Councilor Damabed, and Councilor Roach, I believe. And then we're joined by the clerk of the committee, Miles Starkey, who carries more bags than she probably should, but we're glad to have him here. So I think what I'd like to do tonight is to consider the 2 items that I mentioned in the agenda and explain those, but also do some scoping about the work of the committee and figure out what is going to be the most successful process to get things done in a timely way. In the past, we have worked through rules changes and tried to get to a report at the end of the term for anything that needs really to be done, so that the rules for the succeeding term can be adopted. But if there's something that, like the 2 items tonight, that has merit to be done sooner rather than later, we can do that. And the question we want to talk about as a committee is how frequently we want to meet. I recommend, at least as a preliminary basis, doing it like we were trying to do tonight, before Programs and Services for all members of the same committee, rather than have a special meeting, although we can do that. So there are some items that were referred to as leftover items, and there are items that were items from the law department, some of which I'm not quite clear what they mean, and I don't know whether we'll be able to be joined by anybody from the department who can explain some of these, but if they can, that's great. Have we got anybody aboard?
I sent the message to Andrew earlier.
I actually might know.
You might know what these are.
I do know some of them, not all.
Okay, well, why don't we figure out which they are? But let me suggest that if you're agreeable, that we begin with two items I will explain for the 180-day requirement for docket items and withdrawal of docket items. Attached to the agenda is a revision of section 6, and the material provision that is recommended is the first one. And you may recall that at the end of the last term, we adopted a rule that said that a committee is supposed to take up an item within 180 days. And then the question that came up was any item, or should it be, and this is a recommendation coming from the law department, an item docketed by a city councilor or the mayor, because under our process, anyone can docket an item, and now the council has to accept it to go on the docket for council action. But that's a rare case for those things to be excluded. There's one instance in my memory where that occurred, where some citizen wanted to docket having, I think, a stadium built at Woodland Golf Club, and that somehow didn't seem to be a worthy discussion item for the city council to undertake at that time, and so we turned it down. But what this would do in the first part would be to say that the item needs to be docketed by the city council or the mayor for this particular 180 days to apply, which would give flexibility to a chair to schedule an item that is not so docketed at a later time without any difficulty in compliance with the rule. The second part of it would be to just indicate that at some times we have docket items that come before us, which turn out to be really virtually, well, the equivalent of no action necessary, but then you have to docket them, not docket them, you have to put them on an agenda, have a discussion on the item to NA in it, and then that takes committee time. If the original docketers are of the mind that the item is no longer useful, that this would give them the ability to withdraw without going through the process of having to come before a committee. They would have to agree to that. If they didn't know, any one member who's a co-docketer could basically say, no, I don't want to go along with that. But if they all agree, then the item would just disappear from our docket and not have to be dealt with, which would make the life of the committee's chairs, I think, easier in dealing with items that really need to be disposed of by disposing of them, not by acting on them. So those are the two items which Mr. Lee from the law department had prepared. And I wanted to just ask committee members if they had any thoughts about this and whether we could recommend it to the full committee and then perhaps have it adopted relatively soon. Any comments or questions?
So, sorry.
Yes, sir. Councilor Oliver.
So what we're reading in the packet is what you want
Right.
this to say, right?
Yeah, it's as revised.
We don't have a red line.
We don't have a red line.
Yeah, that part, because it was pretty, and I think I said this recently, that was the intent the entire time, that it was meant to be items that were docketed by the mayor or the council.
The law department picked up on the fact that that wasn't in the case. So that language is new. And the language about an item being withdrawn, that whole sentence is new. That isn't in the rules now.
Yeah, no, understood.
And Miles might hand out copies of the rules just so we have a reference point about it.
If you'd like, I could pull up and share it on the screen, just what the section argument of that. Thank you. But yeah, we didn't get a deadline or traffic change. Okay, that's okay.
Okay, so that's the two changes that are recommended, at least on the short term. Mr. Chairman, member of the committee. Welcome.
Actually, again, my apologies.
No, we're glad to have you. So we were just talking about potentially, I don't know if you heard this part, taking action on this. And if it's agreeable to the subcommittee, I would like to entertain a motion to approve these two things to recommend to the full Programs and Services Committee for action as soon as it's convenient for the committee to take it up and then report it to the council.
Sorry, can I just ask, is there a concern that there have been items docketed already to which this will apply? Is that why you're
yeah, that's the
Just by one particular counselor.
Really?
No,
Oh.
no.
Okay.
No,
I
not at
think-
all.
I think the point is just that there may be things that will come and the chairs are having to sort out their agenda, and if they know this opportunity can give them flexibility, it would be good to give them flexibility sooner rather than later. I've had some inquiry on that, where that would be useful.
Okay.
So it's, any questions, or can we take a vote in the subcommittee? Okay, all those in favor will say aye. Aye, okay. So we recommend that to the committee, and then, Mr. Chairman, you can take it up as soon as you can do it.
Yeah.
And then the other part really is to take a look at the,
Sorry, do we have to report out in part? So that you retain the subcommittee for the rest of the docket item?
that we retain all the rest of this stuff.
No, I'm saying you want me to procedurally report out in part so that we don't lose the docket item. That
Yes,
program
yes,
preserves it,
yes,
right?
yeah. This would be a chunk of the committee report. I don't know, maybe we should, do we have to make it a part A or something? What do you want for purposes of clarification? There's no rule that really describes this. Maybe we should make one. I would say this is a partial report of the subcommittee.
Okay.
So there are, let me just read the other items that are what we refer to as leftover items, and talk a little bit about those, and those members of the subcommittee or others who remember the background can say something about it. We have a financial audit committee, which is an article in the rules, and it exists in the back of the rules because it was designed to create an opportunity for advising the city council. And I guess the question that raises is, should it be there at all? The next item, B, is order of roll call votes. C is Robert's Rules of Order, and we can talk about that. Committee composition is D, lack of reports, meeting minutes for city council meetings, which is not part of our rules, and auto licenses, I think, references where they go. And then the law department had a number of items: second call, recess provisions, special permit filing requirements, time restrictions, and potential renewals relating to the use of city council letterhead, question mark, framing and disposition of motions. And
I guess that was this.
oh, this one? Okay.
I assume.
Well, maybe or maybe not. So I think that my preference would be just to get some background on any of these items that members of the committee or others recall the reason for there being a possible rules revision, and then decide whether we want to talk about them tonight or we want to set a time when we talk about them in more detail. So does anyone recall the reason for the financial audit committee conversation?
Yes, totally. So this was a question that I had asked, and I believe our friends in the legal department have already answered it, although I just want to double check, because somewhere in, and I'll look for it now, somewhere in this advisory committee, or the Article 12, it says basically the chair of finance will serve on the audit committee. And our practice has been for at least as long as I've been on the council, that it was not always the chair. Could be the vice chair, could be someone that the chair
Designated. The chair is
Designated.
designated. Yeah.
correct. But what the legal department said was, no, the chair can nominate anyone they want. But I could have swore, or would have sworn, that it says in here, no, it'll be the finance chair. In which case I wanted to modify that. But if we can come back to that one if you want. I'll look that one up if anyone
Well, it
has.
says the finance committee chair and 3 other councils appointed by the president. So I think you're right, it's a designated player. And if there's a desire to have the finance committee chair or the chair's designee or whoever, there are other items appointed by the president before by the city council.
Yeah,
Okay, yep.
Page
Yeah, so my preference would be that it no longer say the finance committee chair and 3 other counselors. I want it to say finance committee chair or their designee and 3 other counselors.
That seems like a
Point of
relatively simple issue for
It's
me.
pretty straightforward, but what actually caught me off guard is when the legal department wrote me back and said, no, that's what it says already. Like, maybe it says it somewhere
No,
else.
no disrespect to the department, which is not here to defend itself.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. So you want to make a motion to just recommend to the full committee, the programs and services, that we add or the chair's designee, words to that effect?
I guess I have a question, which is, would that designee be any member of the city council? Would it be any member of the finance committee? Like, are there
Oh,
constraints that you would put
reasonable
around
question.
that?
I would think the finance committee, would you think? Well, we have in the traffic council, we have the chair of the public safety committee or some designee, I think, of the public safety committee serves on the traffic council. And that's the model we have. We don't have to do that here.
I mean, when it was presented to me, I think it was the vice chair could serve. So just in terms of, yes, it being another member of the finance committee, I would tend to agree with that. I would support it being another, or the chair's designee from the finance committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. You want to move that, Mr. President?
Reading this section B. President Constitution Finance Committee Chair will appoint the chair of this committee from among its members. Interesting. Yeah, so I do like, because I think that Councilor Sharp is right. That was actually the intent. When we talked about it, it doesn't always have to be the chair, it could be the vice chair. Because that's what we have been doing. So the language would then be the finance committee chair or vice chair.
What do you say, or a member of the finance committee appointed or designated by the chair?
If we want to leave.
I mean, this question,
it
how
could
much
be anyone.
discretion do you want to, you can just
Because
say,
right now, if I were to channel our current finance chair, their preference was that the other counselors be from outside of finance.
well, they can do that. There are others that can be appointed.
Understood.
Yeah,
So I think that the idea would be that it'll either be the chair of finance or the vice chair of finance and 3 counselors not from the finance.
Okay, but who chooses? I mean, in other words, the committee composition, you could say the finance committee chair or the vice chair if designated by the chair.
Yeah, like
you
that.
need a mechanism to make
Like-
that happen.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that. Which is what that is what I'm saying.
Okay,
Is I'd like it to either be the chair or vice chair of finance.
okay. But the
That's
mechanism would be
designated
that if it's the vice chair, somebody has to make that choice. So
It
the
would
chair
be-
would do that.
Chair.
Okay.
It's the chair's
Can
call.
you make that language? Well, so you want to assume that's a motion?
Yep, that is a motion to make that change.
Okay.
And then is there, sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
In part B, which also references the finance committee chair, do you want to make a similar change there in terms of selecting the chair of the audit committee, or you actually want the chair of the audit committee to be selected by the chair of the finance committee, regardless of whether the chair of the finance committee serves on the audit committee?
I kind of like B the way it's written because I think the chair would want to retain that. Oh, and I want so and so to kind of shepherd.
I think that's fine. I just wanted it to be an intentional decision.
Yeah. 100%.
okay. All right. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay. Order of roll call votes. I'm just going to see how much discussion we need to have on these. If they turn out to be more elaborate, we can hold them and take them up in a different order. For the moment, are you comfortable with that? Is there somebody raising a hand for you?
No, but that particular provision came from Council Roach, so I didn't know if you wanted to present it. I'm happy to tell you what he told me, but
Yeah, well, we can.
He does. Let me just give Councilor Bacon, let me give you 30 seconds. and then you can take your prerogative to discuss it further or hold it.
Yeah.
Basically,
Just say what you would like to introduce it, and then we can decide the order of process. I'm trying to figure out which ones are relatively easy technical or whether they're going to take more time, but it's helpful to have the context. Go ahead, please.
absolutely. So my thinking here was it seems overly determined that every time we have a roll call vote, that it is in alphabetical order, which is kind of arbitrary. And I thought that to alleviate that, we would rotate the roll call beginning and end, either picking up a different person in the alphabet, or doing it by ward delegation and then rotating the ward delegation, and within the ward you could do it alphabetically by seniority, whatever. I did not mean it to rise necessarily to the level of the rule. I thought we could just do that informally. Turns out it has to be a rule. I think it would be a nice way so that the same people don't always get to wait to see what their colleagues, how their colleagues have voted. So, not an enormous thing, but I do think it would be nice to do.
And Councilor Roach,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think if I understand correctly, Councilor Roach wants there to be a set order, but to rotate the beginning point of that order from meeting to meeting.
Is that a fair summary of your comment?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay. Okay. This is one that I don't know how the members of the committee, I want to think a little bit about this because we talked about this sometimes in the past, if I recall, and we came to maintain the sort of the current situation. Doesn't mean we can't change, but there was, at least in the past, my memory is that the clerk's office has said, look, we've got enough trouble keeping track of what's going on, that to try and make a rotation and not miss a step and then have somebody say the vote is invalid because the rotation was wrong, it's not where we want to go. And so I think that while it's, again, maybe privileges certain people who can see how, if your name is at the end of the alphabet, you get the opportunity to see what happens. My preference would leave this one alone unless there's a groundswell of change support, but that's and we can see what sentiment it is, generally about it. But my memory is that it was a combination of administration and convenience, trying to just literally make sure that roll call votes, and then you don't want I got the wrong page and I'm starting at the wrong place, that kind of thing. And it doesn't make us look very orderly. It may be that there are better ways to do that, but that's been the historical concern, I think. Not that there's magic in the alphabet. We could reverse the alphabet for that matter. But the president is still always voted last, which I think is appropriate still. But members of the committee have any views on this?
So are we discussing the item?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it makes sense. I think it is fairly arbitrary. What someone's last name is and where they fall in the order. I think you can retain the alphabetical order, and from one meeting to the next, not necessarily one vote to the next, just start at a different point on that same list. I mean, you're still going to go, top to bottom, but if you start at number 10 and go 10 down to 24 and then back up to 1, I think that's fairly straightforward. I think it makes sense. I think it's more equitable way of casting the vote. So I would support the notion.
I agree. I think there is potentially some bias that could be introduced for those who are later in the voting order, to sort of read the room and understand which way the votes are being cast, and agree that alphabetical is arbitrary, but one way of doing it. But I hear your concern about feeling disorderly. So I think either going alphabetically in the way that Councilor Princeman has laid out, or the ward approach, and just saying tonight we're going to be starting with Ward 2. Tonight we're going to be starting with Ward 3. Would be either one. I think would be sufficient.
Councilor Allen?
Sure.
I'll come back to Councilor Roach. I want to hear from the subcommittee first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea of alternating the order. I don't think it actually solves the problem that Councilor Roach is after, because someone's always going to be last. they're just not gonna understand which vote they're gonna be last on until the roll call has started, or the meeting has started. So I don't think it really addresses that problem, or if it is actually a problem. I guess unless we went to like, kind of that electronic, the idea of the electronic, everybody votes at once, everybody has 2 minutes to press the button, yes, nay, yay, nay, or whatever. Someone's always going to be going last, and they will have always heard the 23 people, the other 22, I guess, people in the room voting. So I don't think it really addresses that challenge. I did mention this, or more to the point, the clerk did mention this to me a while ago, and he's like, it doesn't matter to me if I start at the top, the middle, he's like, I'll go random. I'll go in reverse alphabetical order if you want. It was not a thing from his perspective necessarily. But again, I just, to me, it's a change, not an.
Well, I'm maybe and displaying my antiquity and love of tradition, but I'd like to keep it the way it is, but it's up to the committee. If we did do it, I would recommend alphabetical rather than trying to keep wards, because who knows which ward person is there that night. It's hard enough to have one sheet of paper and I think if you do it, I think it ought to change from meeting night to meeting night rather than each vote, because then it really gets complicated. And that does require a bit of a handoff from one clerk who's not on deck, one night to know that tonight's meeting starts with B and the next night starts with C or whatever.
That's a reasonable point. I wouldn't want it to be so restrictive that you have to, whomever is clerking, should whomever is clerking the meeting change, we don't necessarily want them to start, week 1, they started with C in the alphabet and then went down the list. And then the next week they have to start with D. Like, I don't think that's the intent. I haven't heard that, but picking, have the clerk could just say, look, I'm going to start at number 22 and go to the next 2 and then start at the top. As long as it's changing, I think that's the intent, right?
Well, I guess the question is how often it changes and how much administrative burden. I don't want to get in a situation where somebody says, well, we got the rule wrong, the vote is out of order.
Exactly.
And that's my concern. It's simple, straightforward. And that's sort of why I like to change, even though there are some people who are privileged and I'm not at the high end of the alphabet. I've got to hang out there and then say, golly, gee whiz, I wish I'd known.
Yeah, believe it or not, my last name, O, right, begins with O. I was second to last for the first 4.5 years I was on the council. The only person who voted after me was Councilor Wright.
Right.
Well, I think it's to Councilor Roach's credit that he raised this question, since he's privileged by being at the end of the alphabet under the current situation. So it's a declaration against interest on his part. So you want to be recognized again, Councilor?
Please. So 3 quick things. One is, it's not meant to, Councilor Oliver, it's not meant to eliminate the fact that somebody gets an advantage. It is, as I think Councilor Charm put it nicely, to get rid of the arbitrariness of the same person was always the last, right? It's to kind of rotate the privilege. 2, I would make it very simple. Just have it apply to full city council meetings and not committee meetings, and therefore, you're just picking up the next name in the alphabet to start every other Monday, and it's relatively straightforward. And Councilor Baker, to your point, what I would do is just add a simple clause in there that said, failure to abide by this rule will not invalidate any otherwise complete roll call.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand that, but I think you're saying it wouldn't be defective. Is that correct?
That is correct. Well put.
Okay, well, I think this is not a major one, but I think it's interesting to put out to the full committee. And but I hear sentiment in the room for at least having let me just frame what I hear. An alphabetical order of votes, but the beginning of the vote would be rotated on meeting by meeting basis. So that meeting one, you would start with A, meeting two, you would start with B or C, whoever, just.
With the second list of counselor, actually.
And then you go through until you get the end of the rotation, you start again, but with the exception of the president, who would still vote last.
That rule's retained, president always. Yeah.
Is that fair? So is that a fair summary? Plus some stating language that's saying failure to follow the order in any particular vote will not invalidate any action by the council. Just so that we don't get into somebody saying it was invalid because the vote was ordered. Okay. I'm not going to support it, but I'm going to call for the vote so we can decide and pass it up. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. What are you?
3-1.
You're in favor?
I support.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah.
So the
Were
three
you
was
reading the
support.
room and waiting to see?
Yeah,
if
I was
anyone
waiting to
else
go
would-
last. See what I did there? Yeah.
Very
And
prepared.
by the way, I did.
I
succeeded.
think that you were just retaining your privilege as president.
Yeah,
to
for the last.
And if I may, what is the retaining what's the benefit of voting last? That just like,
For the president, you mean?
well, no, in the case we just, when even president, I'm not even sure why that's to be like.
Well, the theory is that, at least in my historical perspective, which may be wrong, is that part of the rationale was the president, because the president was the president, we didn't want people choosing to follow the president to please the president. We wanted the president to vote last, so that they would.
Has anyone ever voted to appease me? Not once.
I just
Not
did.
yet.
I just did. All right,
Pretty sure.
carrying on. Robert's Rules of Order. Does anybody know what this is all about? Suspension, repeat? Yes.
This is my fault. Or maybe not. So the question came up, and this was at, I think, the second city council meeting I was in front of the room for. And the question came up, I think it was
Call the question.
I'm sorry?
Call the question.
Call the question. It was at an automatic, like, stop the conversation, and it's not. And the question that I'm asking is, we call out which version of Robert's rules we abide by or pay attention to. There is a very simple chart, graphic. I'm not sure if I sent it along or not, but it's very easily found, through the Google machine. I'm just simply saying, can we just attach that to the rules or include it so that it's right there in front of everyone? We do refer to it, or at the very least, I'd like to see the reference to it in the rules be a link for the electronic version, so it's easier to pull up. That's all.
Councilor Dunn?
Yes, and. So I think when you raised it, at least as I understood it, you said, would there be some value in calling out maybe a few of the more likely to be used or encountered Robert's Rules of Order? Would it be of benefit to have those, spelled out and articulated in the rules so that people can follow them, so that people know them? Which is why I think it's a valid discussion to have. My answer to that, however, is I think what you just said, which is reference to the, most recent Robert's Rules of Order, or the one that we follow, and maybe sort of like the other documents, recommended best practices, like those links that are on the website, right? Best practices for running a meeting. Maybe a chart, like I think you sent, which said, here are some Robert's Rules of Orders that, you're likely to encounter under the most recent Robert's Rules. That could be, refresh the ones that, you're seeing used most frequently, so that people have a reference tool to which they can refer.
Yeah, I would prefer that to trying to put a formal link in, because candidly, there's a whole book that's been written about why Robert's Rules is a bad idea. And I won't get, written by a very able speed resolver or such kind of MIT.
I think it was written by Robert's ex-wife.
Anyway, never mind. So I think if the president is content with a clarifying chart to be provided to members of the council, I think that would be an easy way to do it, rather than change the rule reference. Because you're referring ultimately to Robert's rules as your authoritative source for matters not covered by the rules, and this is just providing what amounts to a cheat sheet of sorts. Not being.
Well, it's a bridge, yeah, I mean, cheat sheet reference, bridge guide,
Yeah,
Robert's
guide.
Yeah,
And I think that's good
what are
practice.
those books that I lived on, the yellow and black ones, is that,
Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes, thank you. Yeah, like that, and it's just, it is a simple graphic, and I think there were probably 10 examples.
I think it would be
the ones you said were good.
helpful to have the graphic. I do think it's good to just refer to the book itself when you need to. And so I would leave it alone, but just ask the clerk to just provide that graphic if you can find it. Is that it?
I don't know if it's that one, but I mean,
Google machine.
it was
The
very,
Google machine.
The Google machine.
yeah, it's a very
It's literally
simple,
Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet. Yeah.
there's like 10 different,
All right, well, we make that available to Miles, so it can be attached.
and how would we all feel about if we just printed that and put it on a placard, put it on everyone's desk?
I was just thinking I need to print this and stick it in my drawer.
Anyway,
I think we can
I'm
ask.
fine with either, ending that particular question, and I can just, I think it's pretty simple to get.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to NAN and substitute a chart that is printed by the clerk's office. Thanks to Councilor Charn for having found it with the Google machine. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Wait a minute, I need another 2 votes. You don't get to vote out of order.
I would make a motion to NAN now.
No, I did.
Oh, well, then I'll second that, and I would vote for it.
Voting, there you go.
There you go. Councilor Charn might assume you vote.
I'm fine with any.
All right. Committee composition, I'm going to recommend we hold this one because this is an issue I know that's come up and been quite contentious in the past. So,
Can we, at least, can we at least kind of, like, what are we?
Frame, what are we talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
if that's a minimum.
Well, let me come back. Let me do the other 2
That's fine.
first, and then come back. And then just because I'm trying to watch the clock.
Hey, man, you're online.
No, not anymore. He's resident.
By the way, I can
Rules-
tell
Rules
everybody,
subcommittee.
the Wi-Fi, because the service gets worse. You get
This is
closer.
11, so
Oh,
So
There's a-
it's
just, it should be,
arbitrary.
actually, I think 207 is the chamber,
well, that's it.
I think.
They are holding a meeting in there, so it might be.
We have the last 2 left over items.
Yeah, the last 2 items, I just want to, committee composition we'll come back to in a minute. Lack of reports, meeting minutes for city council meetings. This is an item that is sort of cooked around, and that we have the committee reports, and then we have the action of the council itself, which is a board, excuse me, not a board, council order. I'm still speaking out of my history. And that's the summary of the action of the council, other than the transcript of the meeting. And I guess the question this is being raised is, should there be any kind of reports and minutes of the council meetings? And I don't know who raised this particular one. Is that, the author of this inquiry among us? if any?
I'm not entirely sure who, but I mean, if I recall, this is one of the items that came up at the very end of last term. And we kind of looked at each other and said, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's talk about that next chart.
Okay. Well, let me just give a little historical perspective again, not that it's decisive. What has generally happened has been the committee reports have been the primary vehicle for reporting what the council does, because it's minimally first call. So we're really talking about those second call items. And then the second call items often go through a variety of process changes of, various amendments and so forth. And the clerk's office is really, now maybe we can ask through Mr. Starkey to the clerk the degree to which how difficult it is, but the problem then becomes effectively who prepares those minutes and who ultimately signs off on them. The chairs do that for purposes with the assistant clerk for the committee reports, but if you're going to do something for the council meeting, that adds burden, it seems to me, to the president. And to, frankly, folks, I think no disrespect to the process, our president's got enough to do. I've done this job for 3 terms myself, and trying to manage minutes of a council meeting with all the items that are coming through, I think is not a wise way of spending time. We have the recording, we've got both the council board orders, so this one's one I would not personally recommend, but yeah, that's what I'll.
So as a, believe it or not, a counterpoint, because as much as hefty as the responsibilities already are for president, and I can attest to that, one of the probably the best example of why we should do this is DCOD. There were how many amendments, changes to the maps, changes to the I mean, we changed a lot on the council. And to your point, the only record of it is if you watch what must be 8 hours of video and the resulting maps and ordinance. I can think of other examples where multiple amendments have been made to a given ordinance on the floor, and there is no record other than the output and the video. I'm not necessarily saying that's enough reason to force that amount of work to happen every 2 weeks forever. And I don't know what the ad hoc process might look like. Oh, hey, we made a lot of amendments to this, so produce meeting minutes. That doesn't make sense to me either. But I do think that this one, in the fringe cases, perhaps, does make sense to consider.
So let me respond on at least, and I'm sorry. You go ahead and then I'll recognize members.
Okay. So 2 things here. One is that we have discussed as a council whether there are opportunities to be using the fact that our meetings are now recorded to help inspire some AI generated or more automated transcriptions or summaries of meetings. That could be one solution, maybe not, a replacement, but if the idea or the problem is, there's these long videos and then there's the deliverables that come out of the discussions and there's nothing in between, then maybe we can be using some powers of automation and the fact that our meetings are now fully recorded to be helping to fill that gap. The second piece is that I think the events that you described occurred in a moment when we didn't have local newspapers, and we do now have the Beacon and the Fig, one or the other, typically reporting on most council meetings. And so that could help to provide something between, okay, here's where the votes went, and providing a little bit more color. So those are just 2 pieces there. I hear the chair of our subcommittee here acknowledging that there are a lot of other things. So
What I'm wondering about in this one, the clerk's office would be really very much affected by this one as opposed to the current process. I would like to recommend we hold this item until we have a chance to run it by Mr. Wilson, your team, who will be ultimately responsible for trying to pull this sort of thing together and see what their views are. And it doesn't mean we can't do it, but I'm not sure this is one I would move out immediately without having a chance to hear from them, because that's real. So I entertain a motion to hold on that one. Auto licenses is the question.
I can explain.
Yeah.
For Councilor Lucas, who I don't think is okay. So Councilor Lucas had raised this one. Maybe we should hold it, but I'll try and do it justice. His feeling was that the licensing of automobile dealers didn't necessarily need to go to PS&T, and he would prefer to have maybe the planning board or some other perhaps administrative entity or body manage those. That I haven't done them. I can't, speak to the accuracy, but I think it sounded like they were very sort of rubber stamp pro forma, and just taking up some committee time, and he thought maybe they didn't need to. So obviously in the rules is where it says that the licensing of automobile dealers goes to PS&T. So as a change to the rules, he was suggesting switching the body to whom automobile licenses seek.
And just a point of clarification, did he have a body in mind?
I think when I asked him, he said the planning board, but I don't know if that was just because he was trying to think of another body that might do things in the city, or if that was his true suggestion for where they go.
So, it might be, again, without taking this up, I'm sympathetic because there's a point where they show up on our docket, they're routinely granted, and then they go away.
Very rare. It's very rare that there's a discussion.
Yeah.
What is it? The licensing? Who does the alcohol licenses? What's the name of that? Licensing. I can't remember if he mentioned the licensing board or committee, because that was like another possibility.
What I would recommend on this one, if you're comfortable, is to hold it and ask for clarification from him, but also the law department, if there's any particular rationale for why these matters come to us anyway, right?
Totally fine by me. Absolutely.
And just as a reminder, last term, we, in an effort to rebalance some of the workload, we took these out of land use and put them into the
And
now we're looking to bounce them right out.
Yeah, well, which shows you how desirable they are for. This seems to me makes sense as a policy. We just need a landing place that can manage this and has at least a colorable expertise. I do recall there have been one or two times in the very distant past when somebody raised a question about one of these because of some practices by dealers. Principally, it was a parking issue. They were parking cars into the neighborhoods. And so this was the vehicle for that conversation to come up. It didn't have anything to do with the fact they were selling cars. Councilor Rowe?
Is that pun intended?
No, not really. He is capable of that. I'm not. I yield to the master here.
So we need a body with at least as much expertise as PS&T.
I think, if I may be seriously heard, actually, I think that the work is de minimis, maybe something to chair, but if the use case where there's discussion arises out of citizen complaint, then I think it probably is best heard by city council. It may be rare, but if that's what happens, I don't want to delegate that to a non-elected board.
Yeah. And I have some sympathy with that. And, whether, the traffic council's got enough to do already. I hate to send it to them because they're even though they would be pro forma. Why don't we hold this, find out from Councilor Lucas what he has in mind and get some views. Can you check with the law department on this one? Okay.
I would have suggested the same PS&T.
Well, we may make that decision. I just want to find out a little more of the rationale on what could happen. I'm not supporting any change at the moment. Okay, so let me come back to committee composition. What I would like to do is to hold that one, but just spend a minute just to describe where this is coming from. The committee composition has historically and entirely in over my entire career has been 8 members on a committee, 1 representative from each ward. And actually the calendar many years ago was deliberately designed to try and front load the committee discussions in the first week so the reports could be done over time so that really every committee was done by Monday night except for public hearings usually for land use on the second week. And but there was at one point a sense of there's sort of 3 big committees like finance, land use, and ZAP in terms of amount of work. And then by the schedule, it worked out so that nobody had to do both land use and finance, or ZAP and finance. You know, there's a, and so that's different. That's a scheduling question, but it does have some implication in the sense that we all serve on basically two major committees and maybe occasionally a minor committee because of real property reuse, which doesn't act, or we have these special committees like subcommittees like rules. Personally, I think it's served us well, but we don't need, we can revisit it, but I think it's an issue that we might want to hear from more people than are here right now. Councilor President.
So I raised this.
Yeah.
Because I continue to believe that we are unnecessarily hamstringing ourselves in the expertise that we provide on committees by requiring one member from each of the 8 boards on every committee. When it comes to, for example, land use, I think it makes sense to have one member from each ward, possibly public facilities. But on something like programs and services, on something like ZAP, on PS&T, I think there's no need to have one member from each of the 8 boards. I think we should still have every councilor be on at least 2 committees. But the example I like to cite for this is on finance. For many years, Councilor Gentile was the chair of finance, had developed unbelievable expertise and information about the finance of the city. Also from Ward 4 was Chris Markowitz, who was a CPA, had extensive financial knowledge. They were not both able to serve on finance because they both happened to live in Ward 4. Could Councilor Markowitz have served the city well by being on finance committee, and maybe a Ward 5 councilor could have been on another pick your ward? I think it might have served the city council well, given the amount of work that's done in committee. The ward designations seem far more arbitrary than the content of the committees. So if it were up to me, Josh were making the rules, Josh would say every councilor serves on at least 2 committees. But I'm open to the discussion, but I would say only land use and maybe public facilities must have a member from each of the 8 boards. The other ones have at it.
I would add ZAP to that group, but just because of the nature of some of our zoning has ward-based consequences. And, I personally like the situation the way it is. I think it gives a simplicity to trying to sort out who does what.
Yeah.
And the cost of the kind of difficulty of saying, okay, my expertise is more powerful than your expertise, and I should be on this committee, and that kind of conversation. The president has enough difficulties staffing these things, and I'm not sure, again, the president can speak for himself, but my experience has been I would prefer not to have that choice. And it could end up getting a committee stacked in a way that you don't want to have it stacked. There's sort of a democratic feature of having the wards represented, that you just look at the draw, you got to have different points of view just because the people are in it. So I would leave it alone, but other members of the committee, but I would.
I'm not actually sure if it would help or hurt the assignments at the beginning of the term. I don't know. The one thing I will say is, as much as I agree, like in that particular case where we have two counselors who I think were exceptionally, skilled in the finance area in the same ward, totally agree with that scenario. The challenge I think would end up also becoming, and this is completely secondary, but perhaps not a distant secondary, that would preclude, we would still be settled with all the P's on Wednesday night. I think if we were to change one, the other might get in the way of it. In other words, the schedules of said committees, because if all the P's are on Wednesday and we leave ZAP and finance on the alternating Mondays, theoretically, land use on Tuesdays, there's still that influence that would be a problem.
No, we're just finishing rules for this. Was that earlier? Rules, yeah, but we've been having a party here for the last hour.
So anyway,
So,
That, my sense of it is, I'm happy to talk about it more because if there are advantages we haven't, brought up here, I'd love to hear them. But I do think some of the challenges that we have.
so it's almost 7 o'clock, and I think this is an issue that is probably gonna take more time, and certainly I think other people would like to know we're thinking about it. So I would entertain a motion to hold this one, and also hold the law department items, which we really haven't gotten to. And then ask the clerk to, if you would contact the law department, ask them to at least explain these to you or explain them to us. And then my question is how frequently you all would be willing to meet. We have a lot going on with the budget. We could meet the first meeting in May, like the first meeting in April, presumptively, and have one more meeting and then do another one in June. I would not want to try and go to July. But I think the beginning of the month, we might be able to do it, but your time is really important to preserve, and I want to make sure that you don't abuse the privilege. What is the sense of the committee, subcommittee? Anybody got anything? Yeah, that's our turn.
My thought is that it feels like unless, we don't know what's going on with the law department items here, but I think of the ones that we have covered, it doesn't feel like there's 2 full meetings here left. I would say it does to me feel like early May is looking pretty stacked with budget conversations. So I might suggest maybe we skip May and then
go to June. I'm okay with that because, none of these are immediately time sensitive. And if we're talking about committee composition, we're not talking about this term anyway. We're talking about something to take place in another 2 years. So I think putting on, say, every other month, or at least go to a June meeting as a presumptive to our next. Is that agreeable? Mr. President?
Just two additional thoughts. These are not contradictory. These are just additional thoughts. We could do what we just did tonight. Meet at 6 ahead of a regularly scheduled program services budget meeting, but I don't have rules in that sense. So we could do that. I also agree that, we've gone through a couple of these and we're able to dispose of them, which is great. We're also continuing to solicit additional changes that I'm pretty sure we'll get a few more. But again, they're not a rush. So
I think that's a calendar. I mean, we're starting relatively early in the term for rules revisions to be effective. I mean, there's some we can take effect now, but some of these are more. But I think we are in a position to report out the 2 we started with and the adjustment to the voting order, right? I think the others we didn't act on. Robert's rules didn't require an act. If we hold committee composition and the minutes of the city council meetings and auto licenses, because we're doing some homework.
Yeah.
We got 3 items to report to the Programs and Services Committee for discussion. I think the first 2 ought to be able to be disposed of. I just don't know whether the roll call vote order could be done. But as I say, I won't be here. I'll be out of town on the meeting on the 22nd, but if you want to take those up, I'd sort of like to be there for the meeting. So if you could do at least the first 2 of the city before the city council, we can dispose of those, and maybe the other we wait, or we want to hold that one in. But when do you want to take these up? That's, I guess, the question.
I'm also out of town on the 22nd and not going to be able to be at that meeting. Council Malachi's going to run that meeting.
Oh,
so
well, we don't have to take any of them up that meeting anyway. I mean, you schedule when you want to draw it up.
Right. Well, let's talk about this and see if we can schedule a 20-minute meeting before the next city council meeting.
Okay. At least do the first 2.
We've had I think most of the members of Programs and Services are actually here for the bulk of this. We may be able to do it pretty quickly.
Okay.
I think.
And then the committee composition, I think, is when we hold.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're agreeable, let's hold that rather than report it out. Okay. All right. I think that does it.
That does it.
Okay. I'll turn the meeting, and we conclude our meeting and turn it over to you for your meeting. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
I do have 2 separate Zoom links, so I'm just going to end this.